The galaxy had been restless for years, but no one expected the spark that would ignite a war. Out on the edges of space, far from the shining core worlds, a forgotten colony was attacked without warning. The skies above the colony burned with fire as alien warships descended, tearing apart homes and scattering families into the darkness. Among those taken was a young alien girl, no older than 20 by human years, dragged in chains with countless others into the cargo hold of a slaver ship. She had grown up believing her people would always remain safe under the stars. But now, the stars themselves felt like cold and merciless eyes watching her suffering. The chains around her wrists dug into her skin, each pull of the metal a reminder of how powerless she had become. Around her, other captives wept, their voices swallowed by the hum of engines and the sharp orders of their captors. The slavers were ruthless, treating life as nothing more than currency to be traded. She lowered her eyes, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of despair pressing into her chest. War had begun, and she was one of its countless victims. Yet, even in that darkness, fate was preparing something she could never have imagined. For among the chaos, one world had already drawn the attention of the slavers, a world they mocked as fragile, dangerous, and wild. That world was Earth, and it was there that her path would cross with a human whose touch would change her life forever. The slaver ship traveled through silent space, carrying its prisoners toward markets where lives were sold. Each captive tried to hold on to hope, but hope was a thin thread in chains of iron. The girl sat quietly, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, her cat-like ears twitching at every sound. She whispered a silent prayer, not for freedom, but for the strength to endure what lay ahead. She did not believe kindness still existed in the universe. But war is unpredictable. Somewhere in the vast darkness, humans were rising against the storm. When the slaver ship entered a contested zone, alarms blared. Human vessels, smaller but faster, intercepted them. Bright trails of light streaked across the void as weapons fired, and explosions rattled the hull. The captives huddled, together in terror, expecting only more suffering. Yet for the girl, this was the beginning of something entirely different. The battle was brutal. Slaver ships were larger, armed with heavy weapons, but humans fought like predators defending their home. They moved with fearless determination, striking again and again. The girl clutched her chains as the ship shook violently, pieces of the ceiling falling around her. She closed her eyes, waiting for death, but instead she felt the ship lurch and fall silent. The screams of slavers echoed through the halls, and then footsteps. The door to the cargo hold hissed open. Light poured in, bright and blinding, and through it stepped a human soldier. He was covered in dust and sweat, his armor scratched and burned from the fight. His eyes swept across the frightened captives, but when they landed on the trembling girl, he stopped. For the first time since her capture, she saw something she thought was long gone: mercy. The human raised his hand slowly, as if afraid his sudden movement might frighten her more. The girl pressed herself against the wall, her tail curling close, her heart pounding. No slaver had ever touched her with anything but cruelty, and now this stranger was kneeling in front of her, his voice steady and calm. "You're safe now," he said softly. The words were simple, but they shattered the chains in her heart faster than the metal could ever be broken. For in that moment she realized she was not just another slave to this human. She was someone worth saving. And though her body still trembled, for the first time she dared to believe in kindness again. The cargo hold was filled with silence after the battle. The human soldier moved carefully among the captives, cutting their chains with a plasma cutter. Sparks flew as metal links snapped, and frightened eyes turned to him with disbelief. For most of them, freedom was only a dream whispered in the dark. Yet here was a human, bleeding from battle wounds, offering it as if it were a promise carved into the stars. The alien girl still sat pressed against the wall, her wrists red from the chains. She watched him move closer, each step measured and calm. Her heart raced with confusion. Why was he helping? Humans were supposed to be dangerous, unpredictable, even savage. That was what she had always been taught. And yet, when his hand reached out, it was not rough. It was steady, patient, waiting for her to decide. Her body trembled as she lifted her wrists toward him. He worked silently, cutting through the shackles. When the last link clattered to the floor, she gasped, staring at her free hands as though they belonged to someone else. Freedom felt unreal, almost frightening. She looked up at him, searching his face for some hidden cruelty, but all she found was determination mixed with a strange gentleness. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice carried no command, only concern. She tried, her legs weak from days, in chains. He steadied her without force, just enough to keep her from falling. Her ears twitched, her tail curled tightly around her leg, and she whispered in a trembling voice, "Why? Why would you help me?" The human met her gaze. "Because no one deserves chains." The words struck deeper than any blade. For so long, she had believed that her life had no worth beyond what her captors decided. Yet here was someone who risked his life to say otherwise. She wanted to speak, but her voice broke, and tears she had fought to bury slid down her cheeks. Around them, the other captives were being freed. Some whispered prayers, others simply collapsed in exhaustion. The ship trembled as human forces secured it, moving quickly before reinforcements could arrive. The soldier looked around, then back to her. "We need to move. It's not safe here." He guided her and the others through the wrecked corridors. The walls groaned, sparks rained from broken circuits, and smoke filled the air. She clung to his presence, her steps shaky but growing steadier with each moment. For the first time since her capture, she felt a fragile thread of hope. When they reached the docking bay, she froze. A human dropship waited there, its engines glowing bright, soldiers standing guard. She had never been this close to so many humans before. Their armor looked heavy, their faces stern, and their voices sharp with orders. Yet none of them looked at the captives with the eyes of slavers. They offered water, blankets, and guiding hands. The girl hesitated at the ramp, her instincts screaming that she should run. The soldier who freed her noticed her fear. He stepped beside her, lowering his weapon and speaking gently. "It's all right. You're safe with us." She looked at him again, trying to understand. His face was scarred, his uniform torn, yet he stood like an unbroken wall against the chaos. She realized then that he was not protecting them for reward or power. He was doing it because it was right, and that truth both frightened and comforted her. Slowly, she stepped onto the ramp. The moment her foot touched the dropship floor, a weight lifted from her chest. The chains may have left scars, but for the first time she felt they no longer defined her. She looked back once at the burning slaver ship, then turned her eyes to the human. "Who are you?" she whispered. He gave her a small, tired smile. "Just someone who refuses to look away." Her breath caught. The war outside still raged, and she had no idea what future awaited her. But as the dropship lifted into the stars, she knew one thing, with absolute certainty. The kindness of this human was not weakness, it was strength, and it was changing everything she thought she knew about freedom. The dropship shook as it left the wreck of the slaver vessel behind. The alien girl sat quietly on one of the benches, her hands clutching the edge of the seat. Every rumble of the engines made her flinch, her body still remembering the harsh sounds of chains and shouted orders. Around her, other freed captives whispered in low voices, some weeping softly, others staring blankly at the floor. None of them believed yet that they were truly safe. The human soldier who had freed her sat across from her. His helmet was off, now, revealing a face lined with exhaustion but not cruelty. He spoke with another soldier in hushed tones, his eyes flicking often toward the captives. Each time his gaze met hers, she quickly looked away, her cheeks burning with confusion. She did not understand why his attention unsettled her so much. Perhaps it was because no one had ever looked at her with such calm intensity. One of the other captives leaned toward her. "Are they going to sell us again?" The woman whispered, her voice trembling. The girl opened her mouth to answer but realized she had no idea. She only shook her head. Deep down, fear whispered that kindness could only be a trick. That another kind of chain was waiting. She hugged her arms tightly around herself and said nothing more. The dropship landed with a hiss of steam, and the doors opened to reveal a vast human warship. The hangar was alive with motion, engineers rushing, soldiers shouting orders, weapons being moved across the deck. The captives hesitated, staring at the massive vessel as though they had stepped into another world. For the girl, it felt overwhelming. The humans moved with purpose and discipline, nothing like the slavers' chaos, but that only made her feel more lost. The soldier stepped forward, motioning for them to follow. His voice was steady, neither harsh nor impatient. "Come. You're safe here." Some of the captives obeyed quickly, desperate to be led. Others hung back, distrust plain on their faces. The girl found herself in the middle, her feet heavy, her instincts screaming that this was still dangerous. She forced herself to follow, her eyes darting to every armed human that passed. They were brought to a medical bay, bright and sterile, where human doctors examined them. The girl froze when one approached her holding a scanner. She backed away until her shoulders hit the wall, her ears flat against her head. The soldier who had freed her noticed immediately. He stepped between her and the doctor, lowering his voice. "She's not ready, give her time." The doctor nodded and moved on to another captive. The girl stared at the soldier in disbelief. He had defended her not with weapons but with words. Slowly she whispered, "Why do you care?" He met her eyes again, his expression serious. "Because you've already been through enough." "No, one here will hurt you." Her chest tightened, torn between fear and something unfamiliar. Trust. She wanted to believe him, but the chains on her wrists had left invisible marks that no blade could cut. Later, when the captives were given food and blankets, she sat apart from the others, watching humans move through the corridors. She studied their faces, their gestures, searching for cruelty, but all she saw was determination and weariness, not the hunger of slavers. The soldier returned, carrying a tray of food. He set it down in front of her and crouched to meet her eyes. "You should eat." Her stomach growled, betraying her hunger, but she did not reach for the food. Instead, she whispered, "What will you do with us?" He was silent for a moment, then spoke firmly. "We'll take you to a safe place. You're free now. What happens next is your choice." Her choice. The word struck her harder than she expected. She had not chosen anything for so long. Chains had decided for her. Captors had spoken for her. Now a human told her that her life was hers again. She stared at the food, then slowly reached for it, her fingers trembling. As she ate, tears welled in her eyes. She was not crying from fear this time, but from something far more terrifying: hope. The war outside the ship still raged, but within these walls, she felt the first fragile stirrings of freedom. And though she still trembled at every sound, she realized that the human's touch, his words, and his presence were guiding her away from the darkness she thought would consume her forever. The alien girl slept uneasily her first night aboard the human warship. The cot was soft, far softer than the cold floor of the slaver cages, but her mind could not rest. Every creak of the hull made her ears twitch. Every heavy footstep in the corridor reminded her of boots stomping toward her in the dark. She clutched the blanket tightly, whispering to herself that she was free, though she hardly believed it. Morning came too quickly. A human medic entered the room to check on her. She stiffened, her tail curling close, but the medic simply offered a gentle smile and spoke softly. The girl could not understand all the words, but the tone carried no cruelty. When the medic left, relief washed over her, but the fear still lingered. Later, the soldier who had freed her returned. He seemed different now without the chaos of battle around him. His armor had been cleaned, his wounds wrapped, though his eyes still carried the weight of war. He stopped at her door, waiting, as though asking for permission to enter. When she gave a small nod, he stepped inside. "You slept?" he asked. She lowered her gaze. "A little." He did not press her. Instead, he sat on the floor across from her cot, setting down a tray of food. Steam rose from the meal, its scent rich and warm. She hesitated before taking it, her hands trembling as always. The soldier noticed, but he said nothing. He simply waited until she tasted it. Her stomach growled with hunger, and the first bite almost made her cry. It had been so long since food was given without demand or cruelty. She looked at him, eyes wide, unable to hide her question. "Why are you so kind?" He leaned back, arms resting on his knees. "Because kindness is what makes us human. Without it, we're no better than the ones we fight." The girl fell silent, staring at the floor. His words stirred something in her chest she could not name. She had grown up hearing stories of humans, dangerous, reckless, untamed. Yet this one risked his life to save strangers. She wanted to believe in his words, but belief was fragile after everything she had endured. Later that day, the captives were gathered together for debriefing. A human officer explained through translators that they would be relocated to safe colonies where they could rebuild their lives. The girl listened, her ears flicking nervously. Freedom sounded like a dream too large to hold. She was not sure she could live outside chains. When the officer finished, some captives cheered quietly. Others wept, but the girl only stared at her hands, remembering how they had once been bound. A question gnawed at her. Did freedom truly mean safety? Or was it just another fragile illusion waiting to be broken? As the others returned to their quarters, she lingered in the corridor. The soldier found her there, her shoulders tense. "You don't trust us yet," he said softly. She turned to him, eyes sharp with fear and confusion. "How can I?" Slaver smiled too before they struck. His jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Instead, he slowly removed his glove and extended his bare hand toward her. His palm was scarred, calloused, proof of battles fought. Yet there was no chain in it, no weapon, only an invitation. She froze, every instinct screaming to run. Her tail lashed, her breath quickened, and her hands clenched at her sides. But his eyes did not waver. They held no trick, no cruelty, only patience. Her hand rose before she realized it. Fingers trembling, she touched his palm. The contact was brief, but it felt like touching fire, warm, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. She pulled back quickly, her heart hammering. He smiled faintly. "See? No chains." She stared at him, speechless. For so long, touch had meant pain, control, ownership. But now, it carried something she had never known before. Gentleness. That night, as she lay awake once more, she replayed the moment in her mind. His touch haunted her, not with fear, but with a strange comfort that terrified her even more. For the first time, she wondered if kindness could truly heal what chains had broken. The alien girl had begun to walk more steadily through the human warship. She still kept her distance from most of the crew, but each day she found herself looking for the soldier who had freed her. His presence made the metal walls less cold, his voice steadier than the hum of engines. She told herself she was only watching him out of caution, but in truth her heart felt something she did not yet understand. One cycle, the alarm sirens blared through the ship. The calm hum of daily life broke into chaos as red lights flashed across the corridors. Soldiers rushed to battle stations, voices sharp and urgent. The captives huddled together in fear, remembering too well what warships meant. The girl's ears flattened, her tail curling tight as panic rose inside her. The soldier appeared, his armor strapped on, weapon in hand. His face was grim, but when he saw her, his gaze softened for just a moment. "Stay here," he told her. "You'll be safe." But the wall shook violently as enemy fire struck the ship. The floor trembled under her feet, throwing her against the wall. Smoke hissed from vents, and sparks rained from the ceiling. Fear clawed at her chest. Safe? No place was safe. She gripped the bench, trembling as the sounds of battle closed in. Suddenly, the door to the holding bay burst open. 2 enemy raiders, survivors of the slaver fleet, had boarded during the attack. Their weapons gleamed in the red light as they stormed in, shouting threats in a language the captives knew too well. Screams filled the room as panic spread like fire. The girl froze. Her body remembered the chains, the pain, the helplessness. She wanted to shrink back into the shadows, to be invisible, but one of the raiders grabbed a child by the arm, dragging them forward. The child's cry pierced through the noise, cutting into her heart like a blade. Before she realized it, she moved. Her body acted before her fear could stop her. She threw herself at the raider, claws bared, her small frame striking with every ounce of strength left in her. The slaver snarled in surprise, stumbling as she clawed at his arm. The child slipped free and ran toward the others. The raider roared and raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a blast echoed through the room. The human soldier stood in the doorway, his rifle smoking. The raider fell, and the second turned only to be cut down by another shot. The soldier stormed in, scanning the captives, his eyes locking on her. She was on the floor, panting, her hands shaking as she stared at the fallen slaver. The soldier rushed to her side, kneeling quickly. "You're hurt?" She shook her head, though her chest heaved with terror. Her hands trembled, not from pain, but from what she had done. She had fought. She had not stayed frozen in chains. The soldier's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "You were brave." Her ears flicked, her eyes wide. "Brave, I was terrified." He gave her a small, tired smile. "Bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about what you do despite the fear." The words sank deep into her. She had always believed herself weak, powerless, broken by chains. Yet here, in the heart of battle, she had acted. She had saved someone, and the human called her brave. As the alarms slowly faded and the ship stabilized, the crew secured the corridors. The captives whispered among themselves, some glancing at her with newfound respect. The child she had saved clung to her leg, refusing to let go. That night, when the warship finally grew quiet again, she sat in her quarters, staring at her hands. They still trembled, but differently now. For the first time, she wondered if freedom was not just something given, but something fought for. When the soldier checked on her later, she whispered, "I thought I could only tremble at human touch. But maybe I can stand beside you too." He looked at her for a long moment, and though he said nothing, his eyes carried the answer she needed. Days passed after the attack, but the memory of it stayed sharp in the alien girl's mind. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the slaver's face, heard the child's cry, and felt her own claws sink into his arm. Fear had driven her, but something else had come alive in that moment too, a strength she never knew she carried. The human soldier noticed the change in her. She no longer sat only in silence. She watched more closely, asked quiet questions, and even walked the corridors without pressing herself against the walls. Still, she was cautious, her tail flicking nervously when strangers drew too near. But she was not the trembling captive she had been. One morning he found her standing in the training hall, watching soldiers spar with practice weapons. Her ears twitched at every strike, her eyes following the movements with sharp interest. When she realized he was there, she quickly lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "You want to try?" he said gently. Her head jerked up in surprise. "Try? I don't know how." "You fought already," he reminded her. "You saved that child. The strength is there. You just need to learn to shape it." At first, she refused. The thought of holding a weapon felt wrong, as though it tied her again to the life of chains and violence. But later, when she remembered the fear in the child's eyes, she whispered to herself that if she learned, maybe she could protect others. Maybe she could protect herself. The next day, she stood in the training hall once more. The soldier placed a practice staff in her hands. It felt heavy, awkward, yet her grip tightened. He showed her the basic stances, guiding her gently when her balance faltered. Each correction came with patience, never force. His hands never lingered, yet each touch carried warmth instead of cruelty. She stumbled often, falling hard on the padded floor. Each time, frustration burned in her chest, and old doubts whispered that she was weak, worthless, meant only to be broken. But every time she looked up, he was there, offering his hand, his voice steady. Stand again. You're stronger than you believe. Little by little, her strikes grew sharper, her movements steadier. The staff no longer slipped from her grasp. Sweat glistened on her skin, but her eyes burned with determination. When she finally landed a solid strike against the training dummy, her ears flicked high with surprise. She looked at the soldier, breathless. He nodded with quiet pride. Good. That's the fighter I saw in you. The words made her chest ache, but in a way that lifted her instead of breaking her. No one had ever spoken of her as strong. She found herself holding on to those words as tightly as she once held her chains. Outside of training, she began to notice more about the humans. They were not the monsters her people had feared. They laughed, argued, and carried grief in their eyes, just as any others did. They bled in battle but still stood tall, carrying each other through the fire. For the first time, she wondered if her people had been wrong to judge them so harshly. One evening, as the ship drifted quietly between stars, she sat with the soldier in the observation deck. The galaxy stretched before them in endless light. She hugged her knees to her chest, her voice low. I thought kindness was weakness, but with you it feels stronger than chains. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softened. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the reason we fight. Without it, nothing is worth saving. She let his words sink into her heart. For the first time, she felt as though freedom was not just survival. It could mean standing, learning, and even choosing who she wished to become. And with every strike of the training staff, with every kind word from the human, she felt less like a slave and more like someone who could write her own path. The warship drifted in contested space, its hull scarred from countless battles. Repairs were still underway when the warning alarms blared again. This time, it was not a small raiding party. A full slaver fleet had tracked them, determined to reclaim the captives and punish the humans who dared interfere with their trade. The alien girl stood frozen in the corridor as the ship shook violently. Explosions thundered outside, red lights painting the walls. Soldiers rushed past her, their boots pounding against the deck. Her tail lashed nervously as her chest tightened with old terror. The voices of the slavers seemed to echo in her ears, whispering that chains awaited her again. The soldier appeared through the smoke-filled hall, his armor strapped, rifle in hand. He stopped when he saw her trembling. Go to the safe bay, he said quickly. Stay with the others. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The wall shook again, metal groaning. She wanted to run, to hide, to curl into the smallness she had lived in for so long. But then her eyes fell on the children huddled nearby, their faces pale with fear. She remembered the day she clawed a raider's arm to protect one of them. She remembered the soldier's words. Bravery is not the absence of fear. She clenched her fists. No, she whispered. The soldier turned, his brow furrowing. No. Her voice shook, but it carried something new. Resolve. I will not hide. Not this time. He stared at her for a long heartbeat, the ship trembling around them. Then he gave a short nod. Stay close to me. Together they moved, through the corridors, following the sound of battle. The humans fought fiercely, their weapons flashing in the dark. The slavers had boarded again, their armored forms surging through the smoke. The girl gripped the practice staff she had carried. From training, her knuckles white. She was not a soldier, not trained for war, but she had something else, a reason to stand. When a slaver lunged toward one of the fleeing captives, she darted forward without thinking. Her staff cracked against the raider's knee, sending him stumbling. The soldier's rifle barked a moment later, finishing the fight. She gasped for air, her chest tight, but she did not falter. For the first time, her fear did not control her. It fueled her. The battle spread across the ship like wildfire. At one junction, the humans began to falter under heavy fire. Smoke blinded them, and the slavers pressed hard. The girl stood beside the soldier, her ears ringing with the chaos. Every instinct screamed to run, yet her feet did not move. Instead, she planted herself at his side, her staff raised. When the soldier noticed, his voice cut through the noise. You don't have to do this. Her reply was simple, but her heart pounded with every word. I choose to. The choice lit a fire inside her. She struck when she could, blocking blows meant for others, her claws flashing when the staff slipped. Each time she stumbled, the soldier covered her. Each time he staggered, she swung to protect him. They moved not as captor and rescued, but as partners bound by survival. The tide slowly turned. The humans fought with relentless grit, driving the slavers back step by step. The girl's body ached, her arms heavy, but she refused to yield. When the final raider fell, silence swept the corridor. Smoke lingered, and the deck was littered with scorched metal and fallen foes. She leaned on her staff, breathing hard. The soldier touched her shoulder, steadying her. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. You stood with us. You fought with us. Her ears twitched, her tail uncurled, and she whispered, I thought I would only ever tremble. But tonight, I did not tremble alone. For the first time, she realized the chains were not only broken from her wrists, they were breaking from her heart. The warship floated in silence after the battle. Fires were put out, the wounded were carried to medics, and the dead were honored in quiet rituals. For the alien girl, the world felt strangely still, as if the chaos of the fight had burned away some invisible weight. Her hand still shook from the staff she had gripped, but this time, she did not see weakness in her trembling. She saw strength. The soldier walked beside her as they returned to the safer decks. His armor was dented, his face smeared with ash, yet he carried himself with steady calm. The crew saluted him as they passed, but his eyes often drifted to her, watching her carefully, as if to be sure she was not lost in the storm. They stopped at the observation deck where the stars stretched endlessly across the void. She stood with her hands pressed to the glass, her reflection staring back at her. She remembered the girl who had been dragged in chains, who thought she would never be more than property. That girl felt distant now, like a ghost she had left behind. The soldier joined her at the glass. You fought well, he said quietly. She shook her head, her ears flicking. I stumbled. I was afraid. And yet, he answered, you stood. That's what matters. His words struck her as they always did, with a warmth that reached places she thought were beyond healing. She turned toward him, her eyes shining. Why do you keep giving me these words? I don't understand. He looked at her for a long moment, then finally spoke. Because I see someone worth believing in. You may have been chained, but you were never broken. Her chest tightened, and for the first time she let herself smile. It was small, fragile, but real. Tears gathered in her eyes, not of pain, but of release. She whispered, I never thought freedom could feel like this. He rested a hand gently on her shoulder, careful as always not to force. Freedom isn't just about chains coming off. It's about choosing who you are after. She thought of the child she saved, of the captives who now looked at her differently, of the way her hands had gripped the staff not out of fear but out of purpose. For the first time she felt the truth of his words. In the days that followed, the ship carried the rescued captives to a safe colony. When the girl stepped onto its soil, the air felt different, alive with possibility. The others spread out, crying, laughing, embracing the taste of freedom. She stood quietly, her heart unsure, until the soldier came to her side once more. This is your choice now, he said. You can stay with your people, or you can walk a new path. She looked around at the colony, at the faces of those who had once shared her chains. Then she looked back at him, the human whose touch had first terrified her, then showed her kindness, and finally gave her strength. Her voice trembled, but her words were firm. I want to walk beside you. His eyes widened slightly, then softened with quiet understanding. He did not argue, did not push. He only nodded. Then we walked together. For her, the chains were gone, but their memory would never fully fade. What mattered was that they no longer defined her. She was no longer the trembling slave girl. She was someone who chose, someone who stood, someone who found hope where she thought there was none. As the stars rose above the new world, she stood beside the human soldier, her heart no longer bound by fear. She had found freedom not just In open skies, but in the strength of kindness and in the truth that she was no longer alone.